So my student, this is what we're going to explore in the next approximately about 50 minutes. The first thing that we want to achieve is to get some understanding about the concept of sampling, and later on what we're going to do is I'm going to explain to you types of sampling methods that we can engage in our research. Well, before we go any further, let's go back to the basic. What do you think? What is sampling? Well, sampling, according to most of the scholars, they say it as a process that involves taking or making a representative selection from the population. And sampling most probably will be our group of people that we're going to collect the data from. And according to Frey, what does it mean by sampling? It is a representative or subgroup from a population. So, based on these two definitions about sampling, we can have some very brief understanding. Sampling is actually a group of people, or maybe a situation, data that we're going to gather from a larger group of so-called people or data. And let's have a look on what Stack and Hawking say about sampling. According to them, when we talk about sampling, it is a process. This is what they mean by a way of obtaining a group of people or objects to study that will be able to represent the larger group of population or what we call our interests. So based on these three what we call definition, we may have some basic ideas what is all about sampling. So I may suggest to you, when we talk about sampling, we are talking about a process of getting or identifying and choosing a group of people from a larger population. So I hope that at this stage you are very clear about what is sampling. Well, to make you more understand and to make you able to visualize, let's move to this slide. Remember, we're talking about sampling is we're taking something, a group of people from a larger population. The concept of population we can explain as a group of people, and every what we call individual in the population, we call it as element. And as we define just now, sample is derived from what we call the population. When we have or when we choose a group of people from the population, it means to say that we're having a sample, and every single individual in the sample, we know them as a subject. Well, so now I hope that you have a very clear understanding about what is sampling. The next thing, what we're going to explore is types of sampling. Basically, there are two main categories of sampling. We call it the first one, probability sampling, and the second one, non-probability sampling. What makes different of these two? When we talk about probability sampling, it's referred to a sampling where every single what we call elements in the population have an opportunity to be chosen as a sample. Whereas when we talk about non-probability sampling, it explained as a process which every individual in the population may not have so-called opportunity, same opportunity to be chosen as sample. So let's explore much more detail about what are those types of probability sampling. The first one is what we call simple random sampling. When we talk about simple random sampling, it means to say that we have a process of random. We just choose whoever from the population to be our sample without having any procedure, any rules, or any criteria. That's the first one, simple random sampling. Now, let's move to the second type of probability sampling, which is systematic sampling. What is systematic sampling? Systematic sampling meaning to say that it is a process on how we choose a person or individual from population as a sample with certain criteria. This is where we call it systematic sampling. Systematic sampling also can be understood as a process of choosing a sample which we have to abide or which we have to follow certain rules or criteria. Maybe, for example, we have 10 people of the population, so we want to choose only 3. So we list their name according to number 1, 2, 3. So every third person that we list, we will choose them as our sample. That is what we mean by systematic sampling. The third types of probability sampling is what we call stratified random sampling. Well, this is the keyword, stratified, meaning to say that this is a process where we have a much more tight criteria. We have to follow much more what we call a very rigid rules before one can be chosen as a sample. And stratified random sampling can be identified in 2 types. The first one, we call it proportionate. For example, in the context of we people in Malaysia, when we want to do research, we might want to have Malay, Chinese, Indian. So these 3 categories of ethnic, we already stratified them. Then if we choose to have a proportionate, meaning to say that we will choose these 3 group of ethnic according to certain numbers or certain ratio. This is what we call stratified random sampling with proportional. How about the next type of stratified random sampling? We call it disproportionate. What does it mean? It is against of the first one, meaning to say that although we have 3 types of ethnic in Malaysia, we don't bother how many we want, meaning to say that we are not going to choose them equally. We just choose them according to our needs. This is what we mean by disproportionate, meaning to say that when we choose these 3 groups, they might not equally being represented. This is what we mean by disproportionate. Now, let's have a look on the following probability sampling types, which is cluster sampling. What is cluster sampling? Cluster sampling can easily be understood as a process where we choose our sample according to certain section. For example, like we live in Malaysia, in particular Peninsular Malaysia, we might have northern region, middle region, or eastern region, or southern region. So we might only focus on this certain section. This is what we mean by cluster sampling. And the final type of probability sampling is area sampling. Area sampling is a sampling process which depend or accordingly to the geographical so-called perspective. So this is all 5 types of probability sampling. Now let's move to non-probability sampling. My dear student, in non-probability sampling there are 4 kinds of them. The first one is convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is a process of choosing a sample according to our suitability. For example, we may not have a list of people, we just simply choose them to be our sample. We may not have a list of their name, but we just go to the field and get them as our sample. This is what we call as convenience sampling. The second type of non-probability sampling is purposive sampling, or also known as judgmental sampling. This kind of sampling is referring to a process where we choose a sample because we want them to represent certain purpose. For example, if you want to study about how the handicapped people communicate, how those who cannot talk, those who cannot hear communicate. So this group of people, we were only focusing on them, and this is why we call it purposive sampling. And the third type of non-probability sampling is what we call quota sampling. Quota sampling meaning to say that what we will do is we will first identify how much or how many people we want them to be chosen as a sample. After we set the numbers, and then we will just choose anyone from the population until we have enough numbers of what we call sample. That is what we mean by quota sampling. And the fourth and the final probability sampling is what we know as snowball sampling. Have you ever played snowball? Well, you just imagine a snow that you make it round like the ball, and then you start to roll it on the road. What's going to happen? Yes, it's going to roll, and the ball is getting bigger and bigger. This is what we mean by snowball sampling. It's a process of getting the sample by first go to one person, and from that one person we ask that sample, or we ask that respondent, do she or he know another person who's similar to him or her, and then from he or her recommendation we will get the second, third, and so on. So my student, this are those 2 types of sampling, which is probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Well, if you need to get better understanding, I would like you, and I would recommend it to you to have this book, Baby Communication Research book, to get a better and further as well as detailed explanation about what is all about sampling. So that's all for today, and for now, Till we meet again, thank you very much and good luck. Thank you.